All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to explore this really deep tension that sits right at the heart of leadership and identity. We're talking about the connection between humility, strength, and authority. So let's get into it. So, what makes a man? It sounds like a pretty simple question, doesn't it? But the answers our culture gives us are anything but simple. They seem to be pulling in 100 different directions all at once. So, what are the big ideas we're always presented with? On the one hand, you've got this ideal of, raw power, grit, physical strength. But then on the other hand, there's this call for sensitivity and a kind of quiet compassion. And these two images, well, they often feel like they're in a total tug of war, which leads us right to our central question. Is it actually possible to hold both of these things at the same time? To be a person of real authority and strength, but also one of profound humility? That's the paradox we're going to unpack in this explainer. Now, according to the Christian theological texts that we're digging into, this isn't just some abstract debate. No, they point to a genuine cultural crisis, a very modern dilemma about the very nature of what it means to be a man. What's really fascinating here is how this frames the two extremes. You've got one side where some cultural voices are basically saying masculinity itself is the problem, that it's inherently toxic. And then on the other side, you have those who've kind of made masculinity an idol, which leads to these really distorted, prideful versions of it. It's a real cultural tug of war. And this quote from our sources, man, it just sums it all up perfectly. With so many mixed signals flying around, it's really no wonder there's so much confusion. But you have to ask, where does all this conflict even come from? Okay, so let's dig a little deeper. Our sources trace this whole dilemma back to a really fundamental conflict between two opposing ideas: self-serving pride versus selfless service. The texts we're looking at use the biblical story of Adam in the Garden of Eden to illustrate this. His failure isn't just framed as one single act of disobedience. It's seen as a complete abdication of his core job, to lead and to protect. He acted in his own self-interest, he doubted God's promises, and ultimately he passed down a legacy of selfishness. In this view, he's basically the archetype of failed self-serving leadership. And this quote, wow, it draws a really sharp line. The author here is saying that true masculinity is defined by the drive to protect others, and they contrast that with what they call the effeminate man, whose main drive is just to protect himself. This fundamental contrast really sets up the next crucial question for us. So if both of these extremes are failing us, and if the root of the problem is self-interest, then where do we even look for an example? Where can we find a model that actually combines these two things that seem so opposite, strength and humility? The sources we're looking at propose a very clear answer. They argue that the solution to this whole paradox is found in the life and character of this one central figure in the Christian faith. And here it is. This is the turning point. The sources suggest that Jesus provides the perfect model of manhood because he embodies both strength and humility, service and authority, in a way that just resolves that cultural conflict we were talking about. So the crucial point is this contrast, where Adam's failure is presented as this total abdication of leadership for selfish reasons. Christ's success is defined by his perfect obedience and his ultimate self-sacrifice for others. It's a direct reversal, a complete flip. This really breaks it down. For every human failure, selfishness, pride, Christ is presented as the perfect counterexample. His humility, which is so powerfully described in the book of Philippians, isn't a sign of weakness at all. In fact, it's the very engine of his strength. It's that choice to empty himself for the sake of other people. Okay, so if this is the model, what does that actually mean for leadership and authority in the real world? How does it change how we think about what it means to lead? So the texts use this term headship, but they're super specific about what it means. It's not about domination or selfish control. Not at all. Instead, it's a role of responsibility to lead, to protect, and to provide for others. In this view, authority is defined completely by the call to serve. Now, this is such a fascinating distinction. The sources argue that our culture often substitutes just being nice for actual goodness. Niceness avoids conflict, it doesn't want to rock the boat, mostly to protect oneself. But true goodness, that's active. It aims to protect others, even if it requires difficult, uncomfortable, or not so nice actions to get it done. This then leads to a really practical call to action, and it's summarized right here from the biblical text of 1 Corinthians. And notice the balance here. It calls for being vigilant, standing firm, having courage, being strong. But that final instruction grounds everything else. Do everything in love. Strength is given a purpose that's way beyond itself. So let's bring all these threads together. We've seen the cultural conflict, we've looked at its root in pride, and we've explored this proposed model of service-based leadership presented in these texts. This quote, it really raises the stakes, doesn't it? It connects an individual's actions to this grand cosmic purpose. According to this viewpoint, embodying this model of humble, strong leadership isn't just a personal choice. It's seen as part of a much, much larger story. And this is our key takeaway. True, lasting authority. It isn't about grabbing power for yourself. It's found in giving yourself away for the good of other people. The paradox is solved. The greatest strength isn't brute force. It's the strength to be truly selfless. So, we'll leave you with this final question to think about. In a culture that so often measures our worth by status, by power, and by self-promotion, what would it actually look like to redefine leadership? Not as some position you have to attain, but as a deep, profound responsibility to serve.